All right, so you want to deep dive on Denver, huh? Everyone seems to be talking about how much the economy is booming there, but you want to like dig deeper, right? See what's really going on.
Yeah, it's definitely a fascinating case study.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of articles and data, even a CNBC video all about Denver. So are you ready to go past those headlines, figure out if Denver's really a paradise or if there are like some hidden cracks in the foundation?
I'm ready. I think it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a booming city, but like a city's kind of like a person.
Oh, how so?
Well, they both can go through those kind of awkward growing pains, right? And Denver, I think, is a perfect example of that. It's pulling in tons of new people, new businesses, but that super fast growth, that can create a whole other set of problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in the CNBC video we have
Hmm.
really highlights this whole like growing pains thing. It starts off, showing those gorgeous Rocky Mountains, the sunshine, that like vibrant cultural scene. And you're kind of like, man, who wouldn't want to live there? But then it gets into like what actually happens when a ton of people are all like drawn to one place at the same time.
It's like that thing that happens, when you have your like favorite little hidden gem restaurant, and then suddenly everyone finds out about it, and there's a line out the door, that cozy atmosphere, it's gone.
Exactly. And it looks like over 115,000 people decided to call Denver home between just 2010 and 2020. Like that's a 20% jump in population. Have you ever seen growth like that not come with challenges?
Not really, no. And the biggest one that usually pops up is, well, housing.
Naturally.
The CNBC video actually calls out a severe housing shortage in Denver. Like in 2021, almost half of the entire state's housing shortfall was right there in the city.
Oh, wow. So for anyone listening who has ever tried to find an apartment in like a really competitive market,
Uh-huh.
just imagine that stress, but like 100 times worse.
Yeah.
That's what people in Denver are up against. The video said the average home price in 2023 was about $580,000.
Yeah, that's a 65% increase since 2016. The national average was around $360,000 at the time.
It's kind of hard to even wrap your head around those numbers.
Yeah, it's a classic case of supply and demand, right? More people want to live in a place than there are places to live. Prices are going to go way up. And we see this happen in lots of cities that see this kind of boom. But it's not just about the price tag. It's about who gets pushed out when a city gets too pricey, right?
You're talking about like people who have lived there forever and essential workers, people who suddenly just can't afford to live in their own communities anymore.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if there's a way for a city to grow without leaving people behind.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
And the video brings up this idea of Denver being like a victim of its own success.
Hmm. So what about jobs? The video says Denver has like 2 jobs for every person who's looking for work. So is that like the opposite problem? Too many jobs and not enough people.
Well, it might seem that way at first glance, but it's a bit more complicated than that. There's actually a huge gap between the types of jobs that are out there and the skills that people have. Some people call it the Colorado paradox. Like you have all these open positions, but lots of them need special training or a college degree that not everyone has.
So it's not just about having an empty job. It's about having the right people to fill it. Like if I suddenly decided I wanted to be an astronaut, I mean, NASA probably has some job openings, but that doesn't mean I'd be qualified, right?
Exactly.
I'd probably crash the rocket.
Yeah. The video even uses the example of construction work in Denver. There's tons of construction jobs, but just not enough skilled workers to actually fill them.
Wow. So we have to kind of dig a bit deeper then, right? Ask why that mismatch exists.
Exactly. Like, is it that people just don't know about training programs, or are education systems not keeping up with what the workforce needs? Those are the kind of questions we have to be asking.
And to add even more to the mix, Denver also saw about 40,000 migrants arrive in 2023. So now you have this city with not enough housing, a job market that doesn't match the skills people have, and a bunch of new residents who also need jobs and a place to live.
Yeah, it's a lot to handle.
It's like they're all trying to squeeze onto the same overcrowded lifeboat. So what are people actually doing about it? Is anyone trying to bail water out of this thing?
Well, the CNBC video does point to a few interesting initiatives that are being tried. Like one thing is there's this push to offer incentives to builders to create more affordable housing.
But wouldn't that just be a Band-Aid solution? What about fixing the things that are actually causing the shortage in the first place? Like outdated zoning laws or how expensive it is to build.
You're absolutely right. Like incentives alone are not going to magically fix the whole problem. We need a much bigger plan that also tackles those root causes.
Right. And the video also mentions things like scholarships and training programs to help people learn the skills they need for those in-demand jobs.
Yeah, those could be a big help.
Yeah, especially when you think about that Colorado paradox we were talking about.
Hmm.
I mean, what good is a bunch of empty jobs if people don't have the skills to do them?
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of Denver's transportation system. The video said that right now, less than 5% of people in Colorado use public transit to get to work. That's about half the national average.
Oh, wow. That's pretty low. So what if we could make public transit way better,
Hmm.
like easier to use and more affordable? Could that help connect people with jobs even if they can't afford to live right downtown? I'm thinking like a big expansion of the passenger rail system or something.
Yeah, that's one idea that's been floated. It would take a lot of money to make happen, but it could be a real game changer.
I think so too.
Hmm,
Think about it. If people had cheaper places to live and could get to work easily, wouldn't that relieve some of that pressure?
definitely. And this CNBC video brought up another really interesting idea, using the tax money that comes from marijuana sales to pay for things like more affordable housing.
That's kind of poetic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool how Colorado took something that used to be totally taboo and made it into something that actually brings in money for the state. And now they're looking at how they can use that money to solve some of their toughest problems.
That's really interesting. Can you give us like a sense of the scale here? Like how much money were we talking about and what kind of impact did that have on affordable housing projects?
Well, Colorado's marijuana industry has made billions of dollars in tax revenue since it became legal back in 2012. And even if they just dedicated a small chunk of that to affordable housing, it could really make a difference. It could mean money for new construction, rental assistance, even programs to help people buy their first homes.
That sounds promising.
Ah,
But are there any potential problems with doing it that way? Like what if the money from marijuana sales goes down in the future?
that's definitely something to think about. I mean, the marijuana industry is still fairly new, so we don't really know for sure how stable it will be in the long run. Plus, there are also like ethical questions to consider, right? Like, is it okay to use money from something that can be addictive and potentially harmful, even if it's legal? Some people think that money should go to things like drug prevention and treatment programs instead.
Yeah, those are all important things to consider.
Mm.
And the CNBC video makes it clear that none of these solutions are like quick fixes, right? It's going to take lots of different approaches to solve these really complicated problems. But there was one thing in the video that caught my attention. It looks like Denver's population growth is starting to slow down a bit. It's even gone down slightly in some areas. Could that be a sign that things are starting to calm down?
Maybe. It could just be a temporary thing, or it could be the beginning of a bigger shift. There's a lot of things that could be causing it, like interest rates going up, people feeling unsure about the economy, or maybe some people just can't afford to live there anymore. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It's like watching a pot of water boil over on the stove. It's been bubbling like crazy for years, but now it seems like the heat might be turning down a little bit.
Exactly. But even if the growth slows down, Denver still has to deal with the effects of that boom. The lack of housing, the mismatch between jobs and people's skills, the strain on resources, all of that, it's not going to just disappear overnight.
It's like the mess after a huge party, right?
Yeah.
The music might be off, but the cleanup has just begun. But speaking of long-term effects, do you think this big influx of migrants could actually be a good thing in the long run?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, immigrants often bring new skills and ideas to a city. They can start businesses and add to the culture, but it's not as simple as just saying welcome. We need to make sure they have the support they need to be successful, like access to things like language classes, job training, and legal help.
It sounds like a balancing act. But that actually brings us to a big question for our listener.
Hmm.
If you were in charge of shaping Denver's future, what would you focus on? Would you try to slow down growth, fix the housing crisis, or make the job market more fair?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer. But I think the most important thing is to have a clear vision for what you want Denver to be like in the future. Not just now, but like 10, 20, even 50 years from now.
And what about everyday people? What can someone who's not a politician or a city planner do to help shape that future?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to stay informed, have thoughtful conversations, and fight for policies that you believe in. You can also support organizations that are trying to make Denver a more just and sustainable city. And if you're thinking about moving there, do your research. Learn about the challenges and be prepared to be part of the solution.
So it's not just about enjoying the mountain views and the craft breweries. It's about being a responsible citizen and making the community better.
Exactly. And remember, Denver's story isn't unique. Cities all over the world are dealing with these same kinds of problems. It shows us that we all have a part to play in making a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
I'm curious, With all the issues Denver is facing, do you think it's still a good place to live?
That's a tough one to answer. It depends on what you're looking for and what your priorities are. Denver definitely still has a lot to offer, but it's crucial to be aware of the challenges, not just the opportunities.
That brings us back to why we're doing this deep dive in the first place, right?
hmm
We want to go beyond the hype and really understand what's going on in this city.
For sure. And hopefully, our conversation has given our listener the knowledge and insight they need to form their own opinions about Denver's future.
So what are some of the key things we've learned about Denver today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that progress isn't always a straight line. It's messy, it's full of contradictions, and it needs constant communication and adjustments.
It's like dancing, right? You're always adjusting your steps to the music.
I like that. And just like with dancing, it takes a lot of coordination and communication to make sure everyone is moving in the right direction. In Denver's case, that means getting residents, policymakers, businesses, and community groups all working together toward a common goal for the future.
And that future is still being written. It's not set in stone. The choices we make today will shape it.
That's a powerful thought, and I think it's something that applies not just to Denver, but to every city and community in the world.
So if you were like advising someone who was thinking about moving to Denver, what would you tell them?
I tell them to do their homework. Don't just get caught up in those picture-perfect images of the mountains and the microbreweries. Like, really dig into what it's actually like to live there. The cost of living, the jobs, all the challenges the city's dealing with. Talk to people who actually live there. Check out different neighborhoods, get a sense of the community.
Like dating, right? You don't just fall head over heels for the first impression. You got to get to know the person, even the not so great parts.
That's a perfect analogy. And just like with dating, moving to a new city takes commitment and compromise. You got to be ready to take the good with the bad.
And maybe a little sense of adventure. You never know what you'll discover if you're willing to go beyond the touristy stuff.
Totally. Denver's full of those hidden gems, just waiting for people to find them. And that's part of the fun, right? Exploring and finding new things and making a place your own.
Speaking of discoveries, did anything about Denver surprise you as we were digging into all this information?
I was really struck by how resilient the people there are. Even with all the stuff they're dealing with, there's this sense of optimism, this determination to make things better.
It's like they're saying, hit us with your best shot, we can handle it.
Exactly. And that's what makes Denver's story so inspiring to me. It reminds us that even when things are tough, there's always hope, and there's always the chance to make positive changes.
And that's definitely a message we could all use a little more of right now.
For sure. It reminds us that we all have the power to shape our own lives and the future of our communities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Denver, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away from all of this?
I want them to remember that cities are alive. They're always changing, always evolving. They're not just stuck in time. They grow, they shift, they adapt. And it's up to us, the people who live in them, to steer that evolution in a direction that works for everyone.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep engaging with the world around you. You never know what amazing discoveries and conversations are waiting for you out there.
That's the best part, right? The learning and discovery never really stop.
And we're here to be your guides along the way, right here on The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those brains buzzing. So if you were giving advice to someone who's thinking about moving to Denver, what would you tell them?
I'd say look beyond those pretty pictures of the mountains and the breweries. Really do your research and find out what it's really like to live there. Like, how much does it cost? What's the job market like? What kind of problems is the city facing? Talk to people who live there, visit different neighborhoods, get a feel for the vibe.
It's like when you start dating someone new. You don't just fall for their looks, right? You take the time to get to know them, the good and the bad.
Exactly. Moving to a new city is kind of like that. You got to be committed and willing to compromise, and you got to be okay with the good and the bad.
And maybe even have a little bit of an adventurous spirit. You never know what you might discover if you go off the beaten path.
Totally. Denver's full of hidden gems just waiting to be discovered. That's part of what makes it fun, right? You get to explore and make the city your own.
Speaking of discoveries, was there anything else about Denver that surprised you while we were doing all this research?
You know what really impressed me? The people. Like, they're dealing with so much, but they still seem so optimistic and determined to make things better.
They're not afraid of the challenges. They're ready to face them head on.
That's exactly it. And that's what I find so inspiring about Denver. It reminds